dive into this basically. So, do dogs grieve? I'm going to look at a little bit of science before we get right into this, because we need to understand what the grieving process is like for animals. So it's a little bit different to humans, really. So originally, we kind of looked at this is to look for an evolutionary purpose, which there doesn't obviously seem to be one. So it was always thought that animals basically don't grieve. Obviously, observations have been made that make it look like animals are grieving. A real way, easy way to test it is the behaviour different before the grieving process kind of started. So, do dogs grieve, or are we anthropomorphizing, which is where we attribute human characteristics to a non-human animal, item, whatever. So grief could be referred to as sorrow, pain, sadness, distress, or even agony, whatever you want to call it. Obviously these look slightly different, but the way we describe them when we feel these things is based on context. So we understand the context in which we feel these emotions, and then we choose a label that we think fits that. So there's no one set kind of look of grief, there's no one set look of agony, there's no one set look of sadness. It's basically a label that we put on our own feelings at the time based on the context of those feelings. So what is happening in the environment and whether we're in pain or anything like that. So panic, if you look at, there's a guy called Panksepp who basically looked at 7 core emotions. There's one which was panic, and this is also called separation or grief. So for me, I would say that grief is actually one of your 7 primary emotions that we can feel, and that's across all animals because, quite frankly, the brains are pretty much exactly the same. We've all seen Bambi as well. Can't say grief doesn't exist there. So the argument in the animal world is, what evolutionary reason could we have for grief? So a few observations that have been made in the earlier ones, which were 1972, there was a chimp named Flint, and his mother died. The month after that, he basically stopped eating, he refused to socialise with other dogs, and subsequently he sadly died as well. You could literally say he died of a broken heart. So that starts to make us think that animals can grieve. We then have social insects, so even ants, termites, honeybees. These have corpse management strategies, which have evolved to include things like discarding, ingestion, and even burying dead individuals. There was a study by Pinnell et al. In 1981, which found that rats bury the dead within 80 hours, but found that this was triggered by the smell of the dead rather than actually knowing that they were dead. There was a chimpanzee called Pansy, who was an old female in Blair Drummond. So what they looked at there was members of that group. Now, the family of Pansy basically started acting differently, and there was changes in the behaviour as even before that death happened. The reactions when she died changed, and they looked at the members of the group that weren't direct family members, and these had no change. So we've got a full group, family members showed different behaviours, so that kind of grieving process was started whereas the ones that weren't family members didn't. And so, yeah. Another one with N et al., which was a 2006 study on baboons, pretty much saw the same thing. So they lost a family member to predation. The females showed increased glucocorticoids, no idea whether I said that right, level, which is basically stress. And the ones in the group who hadn't suffered that same loss, that weren't family members, there wasn't that change in stress levels. There's also observations on seals, manatees, dingoes, horses, dogs, house cats, giraffes, elephants, birds, squirrels, and ducks. So there's loads of different observations. All these are observations, so there is no, you can't ask the animal whether they're grieving. And like I've said, this is us feeling something, then applying a label to it that we've kind of made up. So we can't actually know whether they're grieving and whether that grieving's the same. So thanatology, which is the study of death of humans, is starting to evolve. Basically, in 2016, there was a paper by Anderson et al. Who called it comparative thanatology, get my big words out there, which looked at animals, so the grieving process, the death, and the social structure of animals. It's then changed in 2018 by Anderson again to be called evolutionary thanatology. So they're now looking at what the evolutionary purpose behind that is. Even Wikipedia has changed its definition of thanatology and removed the specific references to only humans. Some arguments for why animals might have this grieving process: to avoid danger. So if they feel that emotional attachment to or that social bond to an animal that then dies, they'll be looking at why to avoid that same danger, and they're more likely to look at it. You've also got a side effect of social bonds, and which could essentially be because being together in a group and staying together, you're safer, so you're more likely to avoid danger when you're in a bigger group. So the side effect of that is to have those social bonds, which then triggers grief. So that's a bit of background on grief and whether dogs have it. So I'm going to let you all decide whether you think it's grief, whether you think it's sadness, whether you think it's a instinctual triggered response to do something else. There's no solid evidence on this. For me, it looks very much like grief, what we would call grief. So whether you want to call it grief or not, it's up to you. So what does this grief, sadness process look like? It's not going to be as active, but well, for a start, it's going to vary from dog to dog, as it does from person to person. They could become not as active. They could not eat like they did before, and they could overeat. They could have a lower mood, socially withdrawn. They could sleep less, and the grieving process might not actually happen straight away. So there is some animals which could have that delayed process, the same as humans might have that delayed process. For humans, there was a study done in the 1970s which looked at the 5 stages of grief. These were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. From my perspective, from dog psychology, bargaining might or might not happen. Again, that's one that you'd have to ask the dog. It's unlikely that it's happening, but denial, anger, depression, and acceptance all definitely can happen. We're going to look at depression as well a little bit. So, preparing the dog for this situation. If we know this is going to happen, there's some interesting relevance in the animal studies that I've mentioned as well. And there was a study on dolphins, and basically what happened was an old dolphin died, and they basically appeared to very quickly get over that death, so that they left that dolphin to basically to just be dead. Whereas when there was a newborn dolphin, it died. The mother actually carried that newborn around for 4 days. So, what kind of reason would think behind this is that when there was a sick dolphin, they knew it was going to die, so they were prepared for that. Whereas when it was a newborn that died, they weren't prepared for that. So that grief or that sadness or that connection that was there took a lot longer to kind of to go, basically, and then for them to get over that. So we could look at this from a dog's perspective too. If they're aware that the other dog is ill or the person is ill, then they are going to be a lot more likely to potentially get over that quicker than if it was a sudden death or a sudden change. When we're talking about grief and things like that, and from this perspective, this could also be dogs that get abandoned into shelters and stuff like that too. It's not just death; it's abandonment as well. So there's a few things we can do to prepare the dogs for this. So, as always, good quality food and water, because that's going to allow them to have that healthy gut that is then going to regulate the hormones properly. So it's going to have a good release of serotonin, which is going to allow them to become happier. Have a look on my website. I've got a free Happy Dog ebook that you can download. So have a download of that as well, and that'll go through things like food, building confidence, games, and training, things like that. So start building some independent activities and absences. This might be that you do some scent work or some confidence building, or you even feed the dog separately, just to start teaching the dog that's going to be left alone that good things happen when they are alone still. Confidence building is a must. You can do that through different types of training. So a lot of training does build confidence. It's positive based. Scent work is fantastic for building confidence as well, and it also gives them something else to do, and something just to take the mind off it. And enrichment is really good as well, so that releases all those happy hormones too, and it does allow them to have something else to do again. So what can we do? Now, the first thing is to get a vet check for the dog. Now, it could be that it's exacerbated by some kind of pain or discomfort. So there could be something affecting that low mood. So get the vet check first if they are displaying any symptoms, because we don't want to rule out that this could actually be a coincidence, or that there could be a medical reason that's causing that. Set a routine so that they've got a really good routine. They know who's coming, who's going, and they know what they're going to be doing. Be there for them. So studies, there's a really interesting study. According to operant conditioning, you basically can't reward an emotion, which is very interesting. So, or you can't increase the chances of an emotion by rewarding it. However, this study, this quite recent study, actually found that you can, and it's actually how you do that rewarding process that changes whether or not they're more likely to be scared or anxious or sad. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is don't feel sorry for them. If it was a human and someone was feeling sorry for us, that's not going to help. That's going to make us feel worse. Um, we want to actually just let them know that it's going to be okay, that we're going to be there for them, and that we're kind of in that grieving process too, really. So we can try and distract them. We can call them away from behaviours, such as if they are waiting by the door, or maybe whining or pacing, or even like waiting behaviours. Can we call them away from that? Can we give them something else to do? Can we comfort them? These are again cues that we can put in place before this happens. So as part of preparing the dog, this is something we can do. Again, enrichment and mental stimulation. If they're doing that, they're releasing all these good hormones. The study Pankseps, 7 core emotions, basically look at the hormones and neurotransmitters that have been released there. So when a dog's grieving, when a dog's panicking, or separation, anxiety, things like that, these are it reduces the opioids, it reduces oxytocin, and procalcin it reduces as well. So essentially, they can be more prone to illness, lower moods, and less likely to want to engage in activities. If we can get them to start building enrichment, mental stimulation, and even just giving them cuddles and attention, this actually releases oxytocin and opioids, so it boosts that back up. And the way the 7 core emotions work is you can't have 2 at the same time. So if they are in what's called the seeking system, that search for a reward, or whether they are playing, or whether they are in the state where they are receiving affection, that care, what's it called, care circuit that starts, that they can't be feeling that grief at the same time. So they're either going to be in one or the other. So we can kind of balance that. If the more we give them to do, the less time they're going to spend in this grief area. Things that might help: Adaptil or other pheromone type sprays, different scents that trigger happy memories, or calming memories. You can use zoopharmacognosy, which is where they choose their own scents that's going to help them too. And even a thunder shirt might help. Just checking to make sure no one's commented anywhere. Cool. So those things could really help. And don't rush them to get back to normal. It's a grieving process, the same as us. So don't rush them with that. So does that make sense so far? Anyone got any questions on that? The other things I would say is potentially we're going to have more likelihood of fear responses, sadness, and anger from the dogs, because in confusion as well. So it could get to a point where it's going to warrant calling in a behaviourist. So there could be separation anxiety that you've not noticed because I've always had another dog there. There could be potential reactivity if they don't feel as confident without that other dog there. They could potentially be resource guarding again if they feel less confident. And they also could be abnormal repetitive behaviours that show their heads because they're in this grieving process. They're looking for ways to make themselves feel better, and they can choose some strange ways to do that. And it could actually exacerbate or bring these behaviours out. We could also get depression. So depression as more of a can't do anything, won't do anything, getting no joy even when I try and do anything kind of state. So although I said go to the vets earlier, we don't want the vets to be prescribing any antidepressants or type pills or anything like that, because that could actually, we're not going there, it's the vet's choice whether they prescribe those. But we're not going there to try and get a magic pill. They need to go through that process. If they do get antidepressants and don't actually need it, that could make that grieving process longer. Or when they come off the antidepressant pills, the grieving process will still be there. But they could develop depression, and at that point, you want to get them to vets, where the vet might prescribe some sort of antidepressant type pill. So that is basically, in a nutshell, how it helps a dog grieving. Prepare them, give them other things to do, and give them attention when they need it. Make sure they know it's going to be all right. And if things do get bad, call a vet, call a behaviourist. So does anyone have any questions on that before I switch off? I hope this is helpful. You never know when you're going to actually need this information on there. It's not the nicest topic. We've got a dog, 2 dogs appearing on my screen right now. One of them on the scratch and the other one on the sleep. But it might really help one day. Sarah's asking about, what about removing old dogs' beds, toys with the scent on? It's an interesting one. Trying to think of what the consequence of that might be. So, is it prolonging that grieving process by having things there and then getting rid of it, or could it potentially be helping them? So, things like blankets with the scent on it, that might actually help a dog to settle. The same as when we send a blanket to a new puppy's house, or when we get a blanket back from a new with a new puppy, it could have a similar effect. So it could start releasing those kind of opioids to make them feel like that a little bit closer, while that scent is still there. But I think each situation is going to be different and how the dog responds to it. They might immediately not be bothered by that item that's there, or they might go towards that item and be more interested in it, or using it as some sort of way to self-soothe themselves. But realistically, I've seen no science or even information to back up, or any observations to back up any sort of difference. So I would literally look at that as what your dog, the dog in front of you, and see what behaviours they're showing towards these items, and then make a judgment call on it. So cool. So if no one else has got any questions, if anyone does, feel free to drop us a message or comment underneath, and I'll respond after the video. One thing to finish on is give your dog time. Grieving is their way to honour the friend, same as people, and we need to allow them that time and space to do that. So hope it's helped, and I will see you tomorrow for reactivity towards people.